So welcome everyone.
Yeah,
And
welcome back.
Today is going to be a very exciting live stream because we're going to talk about one of the subjects that's just, to me, it's fascinating. Just like I found prophecy just totally fascinating. I also find this subject very fascinating because the world has set this thing called evolution up as if the scientific evidence in the earth proves it to be true. And I found I'm gonna share my screen here because I'm gonna show you some documentation that I have on my website, which is and I want to show you this. Let me flip back to this. Stop sharing real quick because I want to show everybody this first. This is a book. It's like one of the and it's backwards on the screen because the software is flipping the camera. So it's the Genesis flood, and it's a very dry book, I'm going to say, because it's written by scientists, but it's a very, very informative book if you really want to know what the scientific evidence shows us in the earth. And I'm going to show some of that today. I'm probably not going to get through the entire seminar, we'll call it, because there's just so much information to talk about. So it'll probably take a week or three to get through it all. So, but what we're gonna look at is what is science? What is the evidence in the earth? What does the Bible say? And it will answer all of these questions for us, right? The Bible answers all of these questions. Who are we, right? If we believe in evolution, then we're just some accident, right? We're just a random accident, just happened to manifest out of nothing, basically, and so we really have no meaning, right? That's what evolution teaches. There's no meaning behind us at all, which contradicts the Bible, right? The Bible tells us that God created us in his image for his good pleasure, right? We have a very specific purpose to be the people of God, to dwell with him forever so he can lavish us with gifts for eternity. That's what he promises us. So yeah, why am I here? Where did I come from? Where am I going to go when I die? All of those questions. Right? Evolution makes those questions a reality for people. If I believe in evolution, and how do we answer any of these questions? We can't. It leaves us in a very uncomfortable state when we believe in evolution. We're just an accident. There's no meaning or purpose or reasoning or anything, right? So that's what we're gonna look at, these questions, and we're gonna look at what the Bible tells us and what the earth shows us. And I'm just going through my website. So if you want to follow along or if you want to read it, you can also go to my website. It's just the creation versus evolution tab on my menu. And I'm just going to be going through these pages and talking about everything that, the reality of it and what the Bible says and what the earth shows us. So first of all, it's kind of funny because what is science, right? Most people today, and I'm going to say probably most of the people watching this video, understand that what the mainstream media and what the government and what our scientists are telling us today is science is not necessarily good science. Right? We've come to understand that in the last couple of years, that what they say is science is not really science, at least in some things that they try to convince us of. And so it's important to understand that the definition for science, Webster's definition, is knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through the scientific method. That's what science is, right? And the scientific method is in order for something to be a science fact, it must follow the scientific method of observation, hypothesis, testing, and demonstration. So you have to observe something, right? And then you theorize about what that might mean and what it might be. then you test whether or not your theory is correct or not. If you prove that it's through testing that it can be demonstrated, then you demonstrate that, right? That's the scientific method, is observation, hypothesis, testing, and demonstration. Now, evolution only has one piece of that scientific method, and that's hypothesis. It's a theory because it has never been observed. It has never been able to be tested or demonstrated in any way, shape, or form. So it doesn't even follow the scientific method. The only thing it is a theory. Mm-hmm. And it's one that people are now teaching. I mean, they teach it in school as if it's a science fact. And it's not science. And I know there's a lot of people watch this video and they'll turn it off right here because, oh, yes, it is. It's a science fact. I'm not going to listen to you. Well, that's fine. Don't listen. You know, if you care to learn something, or maybe have, you know, something to think about, maybe some further study material, and maybe study this out a little bit for yourself, then stay with us. And I'm going to show you some things in the earth and what science actually shows us. Now, and that's the thing is, you know, evolution has never been observed. They say it happened this way, but I'm going to call your attention to one of Darwin's quotes himself, where Darwin said, "Why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, why do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why is not all nature confusion instead of the species being as we see them well defined?" Right? Mm-hmm. This is Darwin himself. Innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust and the earth? Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. Darwin himself said what I use as my main argument today. Why is there no evidence, there's zero evidence in the earth when there should be innumerable transitional forms, if this was the case, right? Darwin himself said that. And one of the things that people don't realize today is that, you know, evolution, the theory of evolution was created in the 1800s. Well, modern science, we have modern equipment that can go much deeper into space, much smaller into you know, tiny little particles, and view things, that microscopic things that they didn't even know about back then. And one of the things that has come up is that there's this thing called the flagellum, and it's a little molecular machine. It's microscopic. It has 41 integrated parts, of which it would not be able to function without any one of these parts, right? It's a machine, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit for you. It's a machine, has a little propeller on it, and it actually moves things around. It's in many different forms and different cells, and it actually is used to actually move things around within organic beings. And it's a very complex tiny little machine. And it's like I said, it has 41 specific integrated parts that causes it to be able to function. And if it didn't have one of those parts, it would not be able to function at all. And so at this point, I'm going to show you another quote from Darwin, where he said, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organism existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, this flagellum, without any one of its parts, would not be able to do anything. It would be useless.
A scientist and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, Michael Behe is the author of the popular intelligent design book Darwin's Black Box and dozens of papers unrelated to intelligent design published in peer-reviewed science journals.
Dr. Behe, what is your profession?
I am a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
And you're a biochemist?
That's correct, yes.
How long have you taught at the college level?
For 23 years.
Sir, what is intelligent design?
Intelligent design is a scientific theory that proposes that some aspects of life are best explained as the result of design, and that the strong appearance of design in life is real and not just apparent.
Is intelligent design based on any religious beliefs or convictions?
No, it isn't.
What is it based on?
It is based entirely on observable, empirical, physical evidence from nature, plus logical inferences.
Now, when you use the term design, what do you mean?
Well, I discuss this in my book, Darwin's Black Box, and a short description of design is shown in this quotation from Chapter 9. Quote, "What is design? Design is simply the purposeful arrangement of parts. When we perceive that parts have been arranged to fulfill a purpose, that's when we infer design." End quote.
Part of the defense strategy would be to show the judge examples of biological systems they claimed were too complex to have evolved by natural selection, and therefore must have been the product of a designer.
Can you give us a biochemical example of design, Dr. Behe?
Yes, that's on the next slide. I think the best, well, the most visually striking example of design is something called the bacterial flagellum. Now, this is a figure of a bacterial flagellum taken from a textbook, which is widely used in colleges and universities around the country. The bacterial flagellum is quite literally an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. And in order to accomplish that function, it has a number of parts which are ordered to that effect. Now, this part here, which is labeled the filament, is actually the propeller of the bacterial flagellum. The motor is actually a rotary motor. And most people who see this and have the function explained to them quickly realize that these parts are ordered for a purpose and therefore bespeak design.
Under the microscope, bacteria powered by flagella seem almost acrobatic. They tumble, corkscrew, and pirouette, thanks to that whip-like filament. Driving this propeller is a tiny motor, part of a complex structure made of about 40 different kinds of proteins.
The bacterial flagellum looks like a sort of Jules Verne notion of what the future looks like. It has a strange sort of mechanical quality to it, these sort of cogs and waving tails and stuff.
And according to Behe, if any one of these parts is missing from the system, the motor can't function. Behe calls systems like this irreducibly complex, a term he coined. And he argues such systems could not have evolved naturally.
The idea is that there are certain aspects of life, perhaps organisms or organs or even cells, that in a sense could only have come about as a whole. In other words, it was very unlikely they could have come about through just a kind of contingent combination of parts over even millions or billions of years, but rather in a sense had to be created whole cloth all together at once, because everything fits together so well that to remove one part, the thing wouldn't function.
Have other scientists acknowledged these design features of the flagellum?
Yes, they have. If you could advance the next slide. In 1998, a man named David DeRosier wrote an article in the journal Cell, which is a very prestigious scientific journal, entitled The Turn of the Screw, the Bacterial Flagellar Motor. Now, David DeRosier is a professor of biology at Brandeis University in Massachusetts and has worked on the bacterial flagellar motor for most of his career. Now, in that article, he makes a statement, quote, more so than other motors, the flagellum resembles a machine designed by a human, close quote. So David DeRosier also recognizes that the structure of the flagellum appears designed.
Michael Behe has argued that the flagellum could not have evolved, since its parts have no function for natural selection to act on until they are fully assembled. But evidence that refutes Behe's claim of irreducible complexity comes from a tiny syringe that injects poison, found in some of the nastiest of all bacteria.
This is a structure found, for example, in Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes the bubonic plague. And look at the similarities. Now, this structure doesn't rotate, but it still has to extend this structure, which is equivalent to the rod, the drive shaft here. It has to extend that because it needs this little channel. It's like sort of like a syringe. So the virulence factors that are made inside the cell, which is down here, can be exported, pushed up into this hole, and exported out through this long kind of needle, perhaps into a cell in your body or mine, and thereby create misery.
And it turns out the two structures look similar for a reason. The syringe on the right is made of a subset of the very same protein types found in the base of the flagellum on the left. Though the syringe is missing proteins found in the motor and therefore cannot produce rotary motion, it functions perfectly as an apparatus for transmitting disease.
It's an actual machine. It's a biological molecular machine that exists in many things. Yes.
It lives in, we have flagellum in our body.
Yes, we do. Yeah. They're a tiny little microscopic machine that has 41 parts to it. Yeah. I know. And this is one thing they didn't know about these back in the 1800s. This is what modern science has shown us. And modern science, in Darwin's own words, modern science absolutely invalidates his theory. So why do people still believe it? That's my question, right? And, since we know that evolution really isn't a science, it's not based on the scientific method. It is not a science, it's more of a religion, because a religion is a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. That's what evolution is. It's a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. So evolution really is a religion. And I've got a little
it's
a little article here that says that exact thing.
That's proof right there that it's a religion.
And that's why most people believe in evolution and choose to, because they don't want to acknowledge God. And that's the last chapter I have in this study that we're going to look at. That it's just, and I've got several quotes from some very prominent people that talk about that very thing and why do men believe in evolution? They don't want to believe in God. So that's the first thing that we look at when we're talking about creation versus evolution, right? Is evolution really a science? So we've established that it does not follow the scientific method and therefore is not a science, right? So, but now we're going to actually look at some of the things in the earth that true science actually shows us because it's observed, right? And we're going to look at those things and we're going to show how these things what they actually do is they prove that the creation flood happened. The flood that happened in Genesis chapter 6, that is why we see all of the things that we see in the earth. And I'm going to show you all of those things as we go through this study. And one of the other kind of caveats to this is that the law of science actually states that all things left to themselves will tend towards disorder and decay. That's the law of science. And the Big Bang Theory violates this basic law, that order came out of chaos. It's just like backwards of the law of science. Doesn't make sense. Hebrews 1:10, and thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thine hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and they all shall wax old as doth a garment. The creation itself is waxing old. It's decaying, right? That's what that tells us. That's what the law of science states, that everything, if left to themselves, will decay and gravitate towards disorder. And then, modern science proves a lot of things that people used to believe. Like ages ago, they thought that if you dropped a big rock and a small rock of a cliff or something at the same time, that the big rock would fall faster than the small rock because it's heavier, right? Well, it's got to. That's what they actually believe. That's what science said before it was proven that they actually both fall at the exact same speed. Yeah, because it doesn't sound logical that they would, but they do. That's science. Science is observation, hypothesis, testing, and demonstration. And science proved that they actually fall at the same time. And then before we move on, one last quote from Darwin, because I love this quote. He said, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances and for admitting different amounts of light, for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. That's another quote from Darwin. He has invalidated his own theory.
Yeah.
And modern science invalidated his theory. And he even argued why it just seems impossible. But people grabbed onto that theory because they want to believe in something other than God. And it became very, very popular among atheists. And unfortunately, the atheists have pushed all this into our schools and even tried to push this into the Bible, where people teach that between verse 1 and 2 of Genesis chapter 1, there's billions of years. And people teach that in church.
Yeah.
People and preachers teach that from the pulpit. And it is absolutely 100% provable that that is false, which I'm going to show you in the next couple of chapters here. But first of all, I want to ask, is the earth really billions of years old? What do they tell us that they know why the earth is billions of years old, right? Why is it? Because there's stalactites and stalagmites they're so big that it had to have taken millions of years for them to form. Right?
Where's the proof?
I know. Where's the proof?
I know, right? And that's what I'm going to show you is some of the things that prove that wrong. Like carbon dating is another one. Diamonds. Well, diamonds took millions of years and tons of pressure to create a diamond. Well, we've discovered that we can actually create a diamond artificially, and it's exactly like a diamond. It does not take millions of years.
No.
It just takes the right environment, which
Yeah.
is the same thing for things to petrify.
Mhm.
For wood to become stone, it can happen in just a couple of years. It doesn't take thousands or hundreds or millions of years for this to happen. It just takes the right environment. And we're going to look at all that. I'm going to show that to you. So the thing about stalactites and stalagmites, caves, right? And some caves have huge formations of stalactites and stalagmites, and it's formed by the deposition of calcium carbonate on other materials, which is precipitated from mineralized water solutions, right? It's a wet environment, and it's got minerals and different, things in the rock that come out through the water, and it actually, as the water drips, it continuously makes it just tiny little bit bigger every time the water drips. It leaves a tiny little bit behind, and so it creates over time. It creates a larger and larger and larger structure, right? So I'm going to show you a picture now. This formed in 100 years.
How did it?
This
get
is in
there?
Thermopolis, Wyoming.
I know, but how did it?
And
get
it's
there?
a 1-inch water pipe that was left flowing. It's a 1-inch water pipe that was left flowing for 100 years. It created this huge formation. So
where's the water pipe?
Well, it's in the middle of it.
That's what I was
It's in
going
the
to ask.
middle
It's in
of
the
it.
middle of that thing. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised the water didn't get clogged.
Oh, it didn't clog up. Yeah.
Yeah, why it
No,
didn't
it's-
plug up.
Yeah, but it's at 100 years this thing developed. Yeah.
It just got bigger and bigger.
And that is proof right there that it doesn't take millions of years for these formations to form, right? That's just one thing. And then they say that the Grand Canyon, took millions of years to be carved by the river running through it. But there's a lot of arguments against that. For one thing, this is the Colorado River at one of the points where it actually circles back 180 degrees, coming back the opposite direction. And if it was once this rushing mighty river that carved this huge majestic gorge, it came back on itself.
Yeah.
What? That's kind of like, wow. All right. And then, there's a lot of other information, like the Mississippi River. It dumps into the Gulf of Mexico, and it dumps its sediment at a rate of 80,000 tons an hour. Now, the Mississippi River is a pretty big river. It's bigger than the Colorado River at this point. And it dumps all of this silt into the Gulf of Mexico. And I've actually got a picture here that shows the cone of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's this big cone of silt that's at 80,000 tons. 80,000 tons.
Yeah.
Per hour. Not year, not day, per hour. So if the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon over millions of years, where is this cone? Where is this delta from this massive, massive amount of rock that it carved through over all these years? Where is that? There is a delta in the Gulf of California, but it's nowhere near big enough to have carried all of that. I mean, we're talking miles and miles and miles of huge amounts of dirt and rock and material that was dumped into the Gulf of Mexico that's not there. Why not? And then, the scientists are actually changing their minds nowadays. They're saying, oh, gee, some gorges were carved surprisingly fast. This is Science News, July 2004. There's lots of magazine, National Geographic Kids in March 2003, the Grand Canyon is just a baby.
Yeah.
Science News, September 2000, the Grand Canyon is not as old as once thought. They're realizing it didn't take millions of years, and that it's actually impossible. It just took a lot of water, not a lot of time. And that's one thing that we're going to look at here in a little while, is where, what that water was and what caused it. Another thing, and I'm kind of going through some points here in the beginning that we're actually going to look a little deeper at later. One of them is the geologic column. And that's this thing that people probably remember from school, where there's all these periods of time, and all the layers that we see in the earth are supposed to represent each of these periods of time. Right? I mean, that's what we're taught in school, this geologic column. But the thing that they don't tell you in school is that this geologic column does not exist. There is no place on the earth that represents the entire geologic column that they have created. It doesn't exist. There's different places on the earth have actually different layers and different orders, right? Like in one place, this one will be here and this one will be here. Another place on the earth, they're flipped. Now, if they were laid down over millions of years, how to get flipped? How come there's missing pieces? How come it's completely different in different parts of the world, where some parts of the world have a few sections and then another part of the world doesn't have any of those and has completely different ones? How does that happen if it was laid down uniformly over millions of years of time? Right? That's another thing that proves it's impossible for this theory to be valid. And it's, there's gaps all over the place. This farce that they teach called the geologic column is not even anything that we can call a truth. And you can prove that it is not true by simply looking at the layers that we have all over the earth. It is not true. Another thing, they found fossilized trees that are vertical through layers of strata, and some they're not even standing straight up. Some of them are at an angle, going through different layers of strata. Yeah. Now, so you're telling me, I got some pictures there. I'll show you. Like, here's one. You can see the guy standing there showing it. This is actually a kind of at an angle, going through different layers of strata in the rock. That's solid rock right there. Right? There's another picture. Tree going straight up through the layers of strata. Here's another one that's polystrate trees. And what it was, and it shows the distance here. This is a meter. Shows you how big it is. So what they're trying to tell us is that tree sat there at an angle like that for millions of years as the strata built up around it.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to say. Does anybody else find that just
of course.
It's not even
ridiculous?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
That's like, what? Millions of years.
That just sounds so silly. It sounds
I know.
so silly.
It is, but this is what they're teaching in schools
The children,
as a fact. Yeah. Because we can't believe the Bible. We can't believe that God created anything.
And children
This is the alternative.
And children don't have parents to teach them the truth, so they just have to believe it because they're children.
Yeah. And the parents might even know that it's kind of ridiculous, but they just don't. They don't contradict with the teachers at school, people forget that it's the parents' job.
Yes.
To educate the child.
Yeah.
To teach them. And I think at least nowadays, since the last couple of years, people are actually thinking, well, maybe I should be the one teaching my child.
Yeah, thankfully, but it's had to go with that,
But it's part of our society too, right? It's our culture, because this culture that we live in has become a place where both parents have to work in order to just survive. So you basically have to ship your kids off, and you don't have the opportunity to teach them yourself. But a lot of people are going back to homeschooling, and they're reducing their lifestyle so they don't have to both work. And they're, instead of trying to have a 4,000 square foot house, they're just having a 2,000 square foot house, and they're having cheaper cars, and they're one of them staying home and homeschooling the kids, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I sure wish I would have done that.
Well, me too.
Things would have been a lot different.
Unfortunately, when my kids were young, I did not know the Lord then.
Yeah.
And I wish. But so it is. I mean, it is kind of silly to think that this tree could have actually been in that position for millions of years. Yeah, and we're going to talk about how that tree actually got in that position here pretty soon. I just have to show you the scientific evidence that we see in the earth, right? This is true scientific evidence. This is observable things, right? Like, where does this column exist? Well, it only exists partially anywhere in the world, and in different places it's different. We can observe that. We can observe these trees that are, rock. They're petrified trees straight through the middle of rock. And so we can observe those things. That's science. We can see it, right? So the problem that science has is explaining that through the theory of evolution, is it does not work. Anyone that even thinks about it for a second is going to go, wait, how? That's impossible to this until I learned it studying this subject, is this thing called diatoms. And what they are is they're a microscopic life form that accumulates in the floors of bodies of water all over the earth, especially in the oceans. And they're said to accumulate at about 1 inch per 1,000 years as they die and float to the bottom. So every 1,000 years, we're going to have that much more diatom at the bottom of the sea, right?
Alrighty then.
So tell me how this happened. There's an 80-foot whale found in Lompoc, California, standing on its tail, completely buried in diatoms. So this whale stood on its tail for how many thousands and thousands of years would it take to build up that many diatoms around it?
It's just not possible.
I know, right? It's like, wait
The whale's
a
not going to
minute.
stand on its tail for
Thousands
3
of years.
billion years
So what's the obvious answer to this?
quickly.
Yeah, something
quick
moved those
situation.
diatoms and buried the whale in it, right?
Yeah, a quick
Quickly.
situation.
Yeah. That's
Oh.
the obvious answer to this, is something moved those diatoms and stood the whale up and kind of buried it in there quickly. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much of that evidence all over the place, and people just ignore it. And that's the thing. There's another point that I can make here. I'm going to make at the end when we talk about why men believe in evolution, and quote some very prominent figures that say this very thing that I'm about to say. What we have learned in the last couple of years is that scientists, and forgive me, but medical professionals, many other different genres of people will lie to go along with what they're basically told to say. And science is doing that. And I've seen testimonies where people are, they basically, or not basically, they flat out state that they will lose their job. They'll lose their license. They'll lose the ability to practice. They won't be a scientist. They'll be shoved out of the scientific community if they don't go along with it. And that's a fact. There's people actually stating these things that have experienced it. And so, and we've seen that in the last couple of years. We can all kind of identify with that based on what just happened in the last couple of years. You know, and what they were saying was science, and we know now it was not. Yeah. So, you know, they're doing the same thing here, and I've seen articles where there's actually thousands of scientists signing on to a article that disputes this global warming thing, and what's not that there's not changes in the temperature of the Earth, but that the Earth is actually warming beyond what it's ever been, and that it's caused by us.
But that wouldn't be true from where we're at. I think it's getting colder and colder.
I know, in Florida.
It's stupid.
Where's this global warming at?
I know. Well, that's why they call it climate change now, because it's not warming, and people have proved that it's not warming. So now it's climate change because, you know, we have to change the name that everybody knows is a lot, you know, and it's just, it's one of those things. And what I'm going to show you here a little later in this study is that there actually is changes in the temperature, and there's a reason for it. There is. It's just not, it has nothing to do with carbon emissions, especially not from cars, because I'm going to show you something later where it's actually the jungles that release more methane gas than anything else in the world. Yeah, it's kind of funny. That we'll talk about that a little more later, because there is some basis to fact in changes in the Earth's temperature globally, but it has nothing to do with carbon emissions from cars or anything like that. Actually, from the flood, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. Another thing, they've found buried forests 200 feet below ground level, all over different places of the Earth. Right? Entire buried forests. But they've never found a meteorite below the top layer. Ever.
Now, are these Christians that have uncovered all these scientific stuff, or are they just scientists?
No, not Christians. I mean, I'm not saying that none of the scientists are Christian, but these are scientific things that have been excavated, and scientists have discovered these things in the Earth. It's not Christian based at all. This is science. This is what people have found all over the world, and they found these forests. Like here's one in it's in Creation, Illinois, is what it is, and it's just showing the stump of these trees under the Earth. Here's a 200 foot below the surface in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It shows this, the buried forest there. They're actually all over the Earth. They find this, where forests were buried rapidly. They didn't die. The trees didn't all rot away and die. They were buried rapidly. And of course, I keep saying this throughout my written articles, scientists are baffled by this. They have no idea how this could possibly have happened.
That's so funny.
It's baffling. I'm not baffled, because
I've read
the Bible, and I know what God said happened 4,400 years ago.
I'm just relaxing.
So another thing they found plants and animals frozen.
He said, I'm not stressed.
So they found plants and animals frozen
Yeah.
in the Arctic Circle. And they've actually found animals that are frozen while they're still standing on their feet with food in their mouth, where they were just frozen like that.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Easy.
Yeah, they didn't freeze to death,
No.
right? Because if you freeze to death, you become very tired. You actually lay down and
Yeah,
go to
that's
sleep,
true, that's
and then
true.
you die and you freeze.
Right.
These are standing up with food in their mouth. They're still chewing the food that they were eating when it happened. They found a 90-foot plum tree frozen in the ice 600 miles north of the Arctic Circle that had ripe plums, healthy leaves. Here's an article. And even the remains of a saber-toothed tiger in the tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. And we're going to talk about how that happened, because we know how it happened, and there's a reason that they froze so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It would actually, for something, science has actually told us that in order for something to freeze that fast, like a living biological being, to freeze so fast that it actually freezes while it's standing up, the temperature has to be like 300 degrees below zero. So I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but there was a movie about that once, not too long ago, where there was this big, huge vortex and it brought down the cold of space.
That was
I don't remember the name of the movie.
It was with Dennis Quaid.
Dennis Quaid, yeah. And it kind of illustrates
What was the name of that movie?
how this could happen, because in that movie they actually show
The Day the
real
Earth Stood
science.
Still?
Oh yeah, maybe that's it.
Day the Earth Stood Still?
Yeah, but it kind of shows in that movie how it could happen, right? Because if the super cold of space comes down fast enough, then it would just freeze everything solid before it even had a chance to move. If at 300 degrees below zero, it would just freeze you instantly.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how that actually did happen 4,400 years ago. So another thing, jellyfish are mostly water.
No.
They're almost all water. Yeah, that's not the one.
No, that.
I don't remember the name of the movie. It's not important.
Yeah, but you know me.
I know.
It's important.
Gotta know.
I have to know.
But jellyfish, when they die, they're gone. Like
Day
that.
after tomorrow.
Oh, day after tomorrow. That's it. Yeah. And I'm not saying that movie's true or anything about it. I'm just saying that it illustrates how that could actually happen.
Yeah,
That
this way,
being
yeah.
that cold could freeze you so fast. Yeah.
Day after tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah.
Now I can
But-
sleep tonight.
Okay. Yay. So,
Yay.
but this thing with jellyfish is you don't have any fresh jellyfish fossils, right? Because
Yeah.
when they die, they dry out like super fast, and there's basically nothing left when they dry out, and all the water's gone. But they found huge jellyfish fossil graveyards in the earth. So, which would require rapid deposition, burial, and fossilization. It had to happen really fast in order for a jellyfish to be fossilized. It would be impossible for it to take thousands or millions of years.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're basically water. There's hardly any actual material. Yeah. So these are all just things I'm pointing out to you that are science observations in the earth. These are things that have been found in the earth, not by Christians, but by scientists.
Yeah.
And then here's another thing. Most people don't know this, but the spinning of the Earth is actually slowing down. It's not a constant that's been the same forever. It's actually slowing.
Well, time is sure sped up.
Yeah. Everything's going so fast these days. But the actual rotation of the Earth is slowing. Now, it wasn't that long ago when science said it's about 1 second per year. But since then, there have been people arguing about, and mostly people that believe in evolution, arguing that, well, no, it's not slowing down that fast. So whatever the evidence is, it's still slowing at a certain rate. And approximately 1 second per year, even if it takes 2 years or 5 years, even if it takes 10 seconds to slow by 1 second, or 10 years, excuse me, to slow by 1 second, then what I'm talking about here is still valid. Because if it slowed at 1 second per year, and then here's some articles I have. That one's really too hard to read.
Can you blow it up?
This is from Astronomy, June of '92, Astronomy magazine. The Earth's rotation is slowing down. It's going to take 1 second longer, you know.
How do they know that, though? I don't.
Well, because we can measure it against the rotation of the planet and the stars and the sun and everything else in the galaxy. We can measure it. And it's actually, the rotation of the planet is actually getting slower. It's
so if it's getting slower, then doesn't that mean the time is slowing down, or does that have nothing to do with the time?
That doesn't have anything to do with time itself. Oh. It's just the rotation of the planet and how long it takes to make one full circle as it rotates, right? It takes 1 second longer every year for it to make one complete rotation.
So you would think that time would be.
Well, time is not affected. I know that Einstein's theory is that time is affected by speed. I'm sorry if you agree with that. I do not. It's called the theory of relativity, because relative to your speed, the appearance of events will appear to change. But that's just relative to how fast you're moving compared to how fast the speed of light is. If I travel twice the speed of light away from the Earth, time will appear to go backwards as I view the Earth from where I'm at. That's the theory of relativity. That's the simplest way to explain it. It's just relative to your position and your speed compared to what you see.
So why do you think the Earth is slowing down?
Well, that's what I'm saying is they've actually recorded this. That because if you were to actually observe the position of all the stars and the moon and the sun, and as the Earth turns in a complete rotation, then you go back to that same spot, right? As it turns again, it goes back to that same spot. Well, as it turns 365 times, it takes 1 second longer to get to that spot. So that's how they've measured the slowing of the spinning of the Earth. Is it takes 1 second longer to reach that same position than it did last year. So I did the math, because I'm like you, I gotta know. And I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Not about math.
So that means that 30 million years ago, the Earth was spinning at 1 revolution every second. So
I know.
That's how fast the Earth would have been spinning 30 million years ago.
We would all be falling all over each other.
That's right. We'd all be flying.
The sun would flash across the sky every second. So 300 million years ago, 10 revolutions per second. Yeah. 3 billion years ago, 100 revolutions per second. 15 billion years ago, what they call the Big Bang.
Yeah, we couldn't exist.
500 revolutions per second.
Oh yeah, so we couldn't even exist and live
so-
on a planet like that.
Well, and here's the thing: that gravity would have no effect at 500
I
revolutions
know.
per second.
yeah, we'd be
Things,
flying all
things
over
would
the
actually
space.
be flung from the surface of the planet at that speed.
They got a merry-go-round when kids are going super fast, they fly off.
Yeah. And so even if you want to divide this in half and say, well, it's not a second every year, that's fine. That still means it'd be 250 revolutions per second,
I know.
or 5 revolutions per second 300 million years ago. Going so fast that there would be no difference in light at any time, because the sun would just be perpetually in one spot as the Earth is, Yeah. So I mean, this is just one of those things that's a science fact.
Because it sounds so dumb.
That just proves that the theory of evolution is kind of.
Yeah, it's just
I
dumb.
don't know if this is possible.
So is the Earth actually slowing down per second?
Yeah. Yes, that is one of the observable science facts. Yes.
Mm.
So even just 1,000 years ago, a day was a little shorter. Because for the Earth to make a full rotation, it would have been a little bit faster.
So they would
1,000 years
say
ago. It would have been 1,000 seconds faster. So a day would be 1,000 seconds shorter than it is today.
so they had a 22-hour day instead of a
Right.
24-hour.
So a few thousand years ago, a day was shorter than it is today,
Wow.
measurably. Yeah.
I've noticed that, I don't know why this is, but here in Minnesota, during this time of the season, it's pretty light out around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And when I was in Germany, it didn't start getting light out till 6 a.m. So why is that?
Do they use the time change in Germany?
No.
They do, but I just notice by when the sun comes up and what time it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the reason it gets light earlier is because we actually changed the time here, right? We change it
But
by
I mean,
an hour.
the sun right now, the sun comes up and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning. We're in Germany at this time of the year. The sun doesn't start coming up till 6 a.m.
I don't know if they use the same daylight savings time as they do here or not in Germany. But the thing is, it's the Earth is, if you don't know this, the Earth is spinning, right? Like here's the sun. The Earth is going around the sun, right? Once per year it goes around the sun. And it's spinning, but it's spinning at an angle as it goes around the sun. So it's slightly tilted. So when it's over here, the bottom part is closer to the sun. But when it's over here, the top part is closer to the sun. So that's why we have summer and winter. That's why we have the different seasons. Because as we get around to the other side of the sun, then it's either closer or farther away, depending on whether we're on the upper hemisphere or the lower hemisphere. So that's another science fact that's
Me
just
and Andy
observable.
were like, we don't remember being in school for that when they did that
So that's
study.
It makes sense because they have daylight savings, but it's just like a 2-week difference from the United States. So June 3rd or June 4th, the daylight savings has already changed, and it's 6 a.m.
And it may be the difference between Northern America and Southern Germany, maybe the difference in the latitude there.
Yeah,
But I know,
could be.
like when I go up north to New England, there's a like a 10-minute difference. Like it gets lighter there in the morning than it does.
That's just because it's a slightly different area
axis.
of the Earth, right?
The angle, yeah.
So, I mean, these are just science facts, right? These are things that have been observed, tested, and demonstrated, right? This is stuff that we can see that is science fact. It's been proven by the scientific method. And then here's another thing. And I know that I'm I'm only on chapter 1 still.
Yeah.
I'm actually in the second chapter on how old is the Earth. So this is probably going to end up being a 3 or 4 week seminar.
That's all right. You're not going anywhere.
Everybody can watch it if they can't make it at the live stream.
Yeah,
That's fine.
yeah.
It'll be available after.
Yeah.
So, but this is one thing it's another farce, right? This thing called carbon dating. And there's an article that I've linked here. It's a science website in the UK where they talk about this very subject. It's, carbon dating, right? For example, in Durrington Walls, England, there's a 1,500-year-old structure. They carbon dated it to 2,500 years old. That's not a huge difference, right? But then there's some other greatly abnormal things like mollusk shells from the Hawaiian coast showed that they had died 2,000 years ago, but were just recently harvested. And snail shells just killed in Nevada dated at 27,000 years old. A freshly killed seal at McMurdo Sound,
hey, Johanna,
Antarctica.
I'm glad you're listening.
Oh, I know. It does make you laugh out loud, doesn't it?
Yeah. She said LOL.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's so stupid.
Where was I? Freshly killed seal at McMurdo Sound, Antarctica. Freshly killed seal, mind you, yielded a death age of 1,300 years ago. A petrified miner's hat and a wooden fence post were unearthed from an abandoned 19th century gold hunter's town in Australia's outback, and results from radiocarbon dating said that they were 6,000 years old. But they were from a 19th century gold mine.
It's just.
I was sitting here wondering if I was just confused.
No.
You're probably confused anyway.
So here's the question I ask. If it's so inaccurate on such a relatively new sample, how can we assume it won't be exponentially deviant on much older samples, like the rocks that they find and the fossils, right? If they're saying they're billions of years old, maybe there's just a problem with their testing. And so that's what this talks about in this article in this is a website in the UK. It's archaeology expert, and it talks about carbon dating and all that. You're welcome to read it yourself. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to point out a couple of things that they say. And what I really want to point out is the third and fourth points, where if the artifact lies heavily, if the environment in which the artifact lies heavily impacts on the rate of decay, for example, C14, which is carbon-14, which is how they test carbon dating, it leaches at an accelerated rate from organic materials saturated in water, especially saline water. So if it was saturated in salt water, it would appear to be much older than it is based on carbon dating.
Yeah.
And then the fourth is to test accurately, the artifact must have been protected from contamination. Organic matter being porous can easily be contaminated by organic carbon in groundwater, which increases the C12 content and interferes with the carbon ratio. So that's all science jargon, mumbo jumbo, right? What it means is that it has to be a pristine location that's not contaminated by anything else in order for carbon dating to even be close to accurate. So something laid around on the Earth for billions of years and that's not getting contaminated by anything, and you can prove that.
Yeah.
And if it's in salt water, it will appear to be much older than it is. So when we look at what happened at the flood in Genesis, the entire earth was covered in salt water. because the oceans
There you go.
are salt water, and that's the vast majority of water on the earth. And yes, we have freshwater lakes, we have freshwater rivers, but that's because the source of that water is fresh and it has washed all the salt out, and it's now fresh. But when the earth was covered, it was covered in saline water.
Mm-hmm.
May not be as much saline as we see in the oceans today, but it was partially saline water, which would, everything buried in that would have been saturated in saline water,
What was the
which is what it talks about right here.
the sea that had all the salt in it? In the Bible?
The Salt Sea?
No,
Oh,
in the Bible.
oh, the
Red Sea,
no,
Black Sea.
I think it is called the Salt Sea actually.
Not in the Bible.
I think it is now. If we go,
See,
there's
Yeah,
well,
the
there's-
sea, the salt level is too high to even be.
Yeah.
The Dead
Yeah.
Sea is.
Fish or
I think it's the Dead Sea.
the
the
Dead
Dead
Sea.
Sea. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It is
Did you
the Dead
say
Sea.
that, Jody?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's
I didn't hear you with
It's
your
the Dead Sea.
client blind.
That's because nothing lives in the Dead Sea
Yeah,
because there's too much salt.
It's too much salt.
They say it's it's therapeutic for humans.
I actually, when I visited Israel, I actually went and I stood in the water.
Did it heal
And
you?
there's people that get in there and cover themselves with mud. Say that
But
it's,
the Dead Sea?
it's
Yeah.
supposed to.
It's supposed
Well,
to
it's
be
because of the
therapeutic.
mineral content
Oh, the
and
minerals,
everything.
yeah.
It's
What did you
I felt kind of dirty.
Salty.
So, yeah. So that's the thing is the biblical flood detailed in the book of Genesis caused this type of testing to be completely unreliable. And so, you remember when we talked about the 80,000 tons of mud per hour at the Mississippi River? They have measured the delta of this cone. They've measured this, how much it's dumping in per hour, and how big it is. And they've concluded through this scientific method that it's been doing that for about 4,400 years. Something major happened 4,400 years ago, and the Mississippi River's only been dumping into the Gulf of Mexico for 4,400 years. Yeah. Bristlecone pines are thought to be the oldest living trees in the world. And the redwoods in California are among the biggest and oldest, and they estimate that they're about 4,000 years old. The oldest trees that exist on the earth are approximately 4,000 years old. Science data shows that something big happened to the magnetic poles. The magnetic poles on the planet took 6 violent swings approximately 4,000 years ago. This is all science fact. This is just science observational facts, the stuff that they find in the earth. They also know that crude oil, if you didn't know this, it's under pressure, right? That's why when they drill into an oil pocket, it creates a fountain of oil because it's pressurized. And after studying the pressure in the rocks and the earth around these oil fields, they've estimated that the containment can only be expected to last about 5,000 years before it would burst and collapse. So how's it been there for millions of years?
Yeah.
And not collapsed?
Yeah.
But it's been there for
The Earth
less
has
than
been-
5,000.
So stupid.
So the Earth is how old? 2,000?
Well,
4,000?
we're gonna talk about that right now.
Oh.
Because and I actually have what I'm showing you right now is the evidence in the earth, science evidence, because 4,400 years ago, guess what happened?
Flood.
What?
The flood. Exactly. The flood of Genesis happened 4,400 years ago. So they're right. the delta has been building for 4,400 years. The redwood trees are approximately 4,000 years old. The containment has not lasted 5,000 years yet. The magnetic poles had 6 violent swings 4,400 years ago.
So what's going to happen to the delta since it's pouring mud in there all this time? Isn't it going to clog up?
Well, now it just keeps getting bigger. This is the Mississippi River as it comes into the Gulf of Mexico, and this is the sediment. This is the big cone of all that sediment that's been dumping in for 4,400 years at 80,000 tons an hour. This is the size of it. It's still got room to grow. I mean, it's just filling up the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. So the flood happened 4,400 years ago. All of this evidence shows us that, yeah, the oldest things on the earth are about 4,000 years old, they estimate. Right? And so the Bible actually shows us this too, because just like I did the math on the rotation of the earth slowing, I had to find out, does the Bible really tell us the ages of every single person? Then they had, like Adam was, so how old was Adam when he had Seth? 130. It tells us that specifically, right? Mm-hmm. It tells us the age of every man he was when he had his son, that's recorded. Mm-hmm. All the way up to Abraham. And Abraham was 9. I'm sorry, Abraham wasn't 9. The earth was 1,946 years old when Abraham was born. It was 2,046 years old when God made the promises to Abraham and Isaac was born. Mm-hmm. So it was 2,000 years from the creation to Abraham. We have that recorded in the Bible. I actually went to the Bible and did all this research myself, where it just says it. I didn't have to speculate on anything. I just went and found this information in the Bible, where Adam was 130, Seth was 105, Enos was 90, Canaan was 70, so on and so forth, how old they were all the way up to Abraham. And then from Abraham, we have historical facts that we can determine that since then, because, right, remember, it was 350 years before Abraham that the flood happened. It was 300 years before 1946. Mm-hmm. It was the 1650-ish, 1646 or something like that. I don't think it was 46. I think I'm getting that from it. But it was about 1650 that the flood happened from creation. It was 300 years before Abraham was born. And so when we got 2,000 years at the middle of Abraham's life, or the middle of, from the time he was born to when God made the promises, Abraham actually lived to be 180, I think. If I remember right.
Only 180 years old?
Yeah.
I thought he lived to be like 800.
No, not
Abraham. Not after the flood. The first generation of people after the flood sometimes lived 400 years. But then the next generation started getting shorter and shorter. And by Abraham's time, people were only living a couple hundred years.
Oh, yeah.
And then shortly after that, it was, only into the hundreds. And Moses lived to be 120. So the lifespan is getting shorter, right?
It didn't take long before it started dropping off.
Started changing, and we're going to talk about why that happened. Why were people's lifespans so long right after the flood, but then they got shorter and shorter in just a few generations, right? We're going to talk about all of that when we get into some of these next chapters. But it's going on 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna finish up here. I'm going to show you this timing. And then we'll pick it up again next Sunday and continue talking about this, because it's a fascinating subject, and the Bible literally tells us everything. The science fact that we find in the earth proves the flood of Genesis 100%.
Yeah.
So this is the list of ages, and then after Abraham, we're actually given the number of years, right? We're told that it was 470 years from Abraham when he was about 100 years old to the actual conquering of the Promised Land. It tells us that it was 430 years after the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt. So that's 430 years plus the 40 years that they dwelt there. And then Abraham and his seed were his promises made, and it gives us this timing a couple times. 400 years in Egypt, right? So when we look at all of the times that it gave us, we can see that the total time of Abraham and his seed spent sojourning in Egypt was 430 years plus the 40 years in the wilderness.
And weren't they like 40 minutes outside of the Promised Land or something? Not 40 minutes. 40 miles.
Well, they
like
probably weren't. Remember, we looked at a map.
Yeah.
And where they were in the wilderness as they were wandering
It was only
around.
like 100 miles.
And it wasn't that far from the Promised Land.
And
but that was because they sinned and they were evil, and God said, "Okay, your kids are going in. You're going to die in the desert."
So because they did so much griping and complaining.
Yeah, and so they ended up dying
Did they go
in the
to
desert.
different cities?
What?
Did they go to different cities on their travel? They went to different towns.
Oh yeah,
or
they
cities?
journeyed through different areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
They kind of went
got in
like
some fights.
that.
No. They're just going.
Yeah, they wandered all over the place in 40 years.
40 years.
Because remember, God said that you're gonna stay in the desert and you're gonna die, and your kids are gonna be who go into the Promised Land. And their clothing and their shoes, nothing wore out for that whole 40 years.
I wonder why.
And God fed them with manna. God led them by a pillar of fire at night and a cloud of smoke in the day, and He led them around on this wandering journey through the wilderness until they died and their kids were of age, and then He
I
brought
find
them
it
in.
comical. There is a lesson in that,
That's-
but I find it absolutely
don't
comical.
Stop complaining and moaning when God has you.
Go
He's
through
promised you something. If they wouldn't have done
Yeah,
what they
that's
did,
right. Yeah.
if they wouldn't have been
Imagine.
moaning and complaining and done what they did, they probably would have only been a couple more weeks in the wilderness, and brought them into the
They
promised
were
land.
not that far away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Because I
kinda
saw a map somebody had on a film,
It's unnecessary
and it
suffering.
showed how they were actually able to get across, and God parted the seas, where it was deeper.
Oh, I know. And there's
they
actual
actually-
chariot wheels and weapons and things that they find there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
It's
They
just
showed what different towns they went to, and it just
Yeah.
kind of like went like that, and it's like, well, where they wanted to go was up here. If they had just not gone all over here, just gone straight across, it would have been okay.
Yeah.
Probably would have taken them about an hour.
No.
Well, there was probably
They were
3
going by
million
camel.
or so.
Yeah.
And so it was actually very slow traveling because women
But
and
still,
children. But
maybe it would have taken them
still,
a
it wouldn't
month
have
to
taken
get
that
there,
long, yeah.
if that.
it certainly
you
wouldn't
know.
have taken 40 years.
No. It's a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. So from Scripture itself, we see that it was about 470 years to the coming into Israel, and then we see that in Acts 13 it tells us that they gave them judges about the space of 450 years. So we've got 920 years there, right? And then the time of the kings was approximately 500 years until Nebuchadnezzar invaded Israel. And then from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel was a young man, he was captured and taken to Babylon, right? And he was made part of the king's court. And then when he was an old man is when he prophesied the prophecy of 70 weeks. And we were told that it would be from the time of the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem, that it would be 483 years to the Messiah. The command was given in Ezra chapter 1 with King Cyrus. That's the command that was prophesied. And it was 483 years later that Christ was born. So we've got 2,000 years to the birth of Jesus from Abraham. So we got 2,000 years from creation to Abraham, 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus, and then where are we at today? 2022, 2022 years from Christ.
Yeah.
So the earth is about 6,000 years old. That's a proven fact. And when you look at the science data, and you know that the flood happened around 1600-ish, 1650, somewhere. And I forget, for some reason I'm forgetting the exact date. But it was 4,400 years ago. So we know there's two things that show us the same time frame: the science data in the earth and the Bible, that the earth is 6,000 years old. Now there's people, Christians mind you, that argue that the earth is 10,000 years old, or that evolution fits in the Bible and all that. You're welcome, Paul. It's my
Hi,
pleasure.
Paul. You said thank you for sharing your research and insights, Dan.
It's totally my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. It's just so awesome.
Yeah, he loves it. It's not work for him.
Yeah. I wish I could do it full time.
Yeah.
So we're going to stop this live stream and pick it up next week. And then, so next week we're going to talk about what are dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Because aren't there evidence of all these dinosaurs that have died off?
Yeah.
Well, there's evidence, but it's not what they say it is.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that next week.
These dinosaurs are.
Yeah, the question is, are they 4 billion or 60 billion?
Yeah.
Scientists keep saying
Yeah,
all
they're
different.
not even millions of years old.
No.
No.
We'll talk about that next week. So, thank you all for joining, and thanks everyone for that's watching later. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I got to click stop
Thank
share.
you, Johanna and Paul, for showing up in chat.
Yeah, for chatting
It's
with
nice
us.
to know you guys are here. Sheila, hi Sheila.
Hi,
You're new.
Nice to meet you,
Thank
Sheila.
you. Thoroughly enjoyed. Good. God bless you.
Glad you enjoyed it, and I
Yeah.
hope to see you next week.
Yeah.
And then don't forget, on Wednesdays we have another live stream where we talk about biblical truth. Sundays we just finished the Revelation study, and we're going through creation versus evolution. But on Wednesdays we're talking about what it really means to be a Christian and truths of the Bible as far as salvation and things like that. So please join us then too.
You're welcome, Johanna. We love and miss you guys.
Yeah, it's been a long
while.
time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So
We need to do that lunch,
Paul. Not me. Y'all are gonna meet for lunch. Anyway,
So
thank you so much. We forgot to pray though. You usually pray at the end.
yeah, well, it's not done yet. So thank you, Lord, for preserving your truth for us, for sharing the history and exactly what you did. So we don't have to question anything, Lord. We're so grateful. Thank you in Jesus' name.
So we hope everybody has a wonderful week. I'm like, what day is it?
It's Sunday.
Yeah, half a week. We
Well,
only have a few
enjoy
more
your
days.
return to work tomorrow if you work Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and give it a big thumbs up. Smash it.
And
Smash the
share.
like button.
Share.
And share with your family and friends.
That's
Yeah.
how we get the word out to more people.
Yeah. Share it, and like it.
Yeah.
So,
So God bless you all.
yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Ah!